Three broadcasting
Hello, Global
live.
Live on TV. Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is December 6th, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here at Laughtears Salon on Conversation with Roy Benjamin and Duncan Echelson. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be with you.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, conversation is such a funny word because etymologically it comes from like living together, a place where one lives or dwells, behavior, informal interchange. And in fact, in the green room before we started, this word came up. Etymologically, the word conversation comes from intercourse also.
Hmm.
So that's sort of funny. So I think it's funny because words evoke more in their meaning. In the word conversation is sort of like it's a con job over verse. So what the heck is I'm a more verbal person. I can't even read books, but both of you have taught me the wisdom you've learned from books. So is a conversation a con job, or is it conning verse, which is conning what we learn from books into knowledge? So that wasn't a question, sorry.
So are books a continuation of a conversation you're having with yourself? I don't know. Yeah. I talk to myself all the time. Fortunately, I don't listen to myself.
But is conversation a con job, basically? I mean, are we winging?
No. Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
But I mean, and we need to be aware of that. Like I was listening to, I forget it what. I mean, so many conversations are actually, you'd call it a con job. I'd say they're basically a PR thing. It's somebody promoting a point of view or selling a product, and they're not really going to tell you up front that that's what they're doing, and but other conversations, like for instance, on the Monday book club yesterday, it was pretty wonderful. I mean, we're reading the Edna O'Brien book, The Country Girls, which is based upon Edna O'Brien's experience in the small town in the countryside of Ireland, and it has a lot of things in there. The father drunk and angry, the hired hand who's helpful but crude, and then the men in the village, which are obviously trying to put the make on these young girls, and then the mother dies. And I read with the group. I think there was 6 of us yesterday, and it really, because Edna O'Brien is a good writer and puts so many things in. I mean, I wasn't raised in the countryside in Ireland, but you could feel the pathos in it. And it really gave us something to talk about at the end and to share experiences, etc., which I think is the real value of using books to give a conversation gravity. So it's just not yakety yakety yacky in the coffee shop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always like the name of Cynthia Heimel. Do you remember her? She used to write for the Village Voice, but she was very funny. But she wrote a book called Enough About You. So that's the yeah. Sometimes conversations are difficult if the other person wants to have an audience or a monologue. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Roy, do you know about this Edna O'Brien? Because Wikipedia, first learned about her yesterday, mainly from Duncan mentioning that, and they said she was Joycean in a way.
Yeah, actually, I do. It's weird. I have a book of hers that on Joyce. I think it was part of a famous author series that she did, Joyce. Yeah.
Oh, Well, she wrote a book on Joyce as part of the famous. Yeah, she wrote. I think she put out that book in the Country Girls in like 1960, which was 62 years ago. I don't know exactly when she put it out. She just turned 90 something.
Yeah.
And she's still writing. And
yeah, it was 1960 she put that out. But you know, it is funny because the word that it seemed you brought up there was it's a catalyst. Like the printed word can be a catalyst for spoken word. Because
or for intelligent spoken, I can lead into intelligent spoken word as opposed to random chit chat. I mean, I hate to tell you, I don't particularly like parties. I mean, I really don't. You know, and I don't. I mean, it's fine for a while. I mean, I come in, I'd like to say hello to everybody and all that, but you know, I usually in a party situation eventually end up sitting in a corner talking with one or two people about some particular subject. You know, but you know, I like to talk with people who can focus.
Well, I know. Heidegger talks about the difference between true speech and chit chat. You know, he's tormented by the idea of empty chit chat. You know, that didn't convey the word or whatever it was he was trying to communicate. It's hard to get found at a party. You know.
He lived in the woods, if I remember correctly. He was kind of a hermity type.
Well, it's just the nature too of spoken word, though. It's like how our brains work. It seems to me is more like Eliot saying poetry is outing your inner dialogue. That's like your inner conversation is how we exist. So then when we invented printed word, we tried to nail this simultaneity or spontaneity of conversation and say, here it exists now. You know, this exists. It's not an ever changing what do you want to say? The conversation doesn't say something. It just exists. It's more the process of it happening. But you think you want to say something that's like you both said, like intelligent, true speech.
Go ahead, Rod, please.
I was impressed with the interviews that you did on the brother side of the wake. You know, because I felt like people were really thinking about the questions, and a lot of times interviews are kind of wooden, and but they seem to be really thinking about things like the journey versus the destination.
You mean like on the spot, the person on the street spot? Yeah. You know, and then that's editing. See, there's the other thing is that if you record 200 people being asked a funny question and you only show 3 or 4 of them, it sounds like, boy, those people were, smart. Like the guy who comes to the Wake meeting in Dublin, Robert from Cork.
Robert French.
Robert French, from
with the
Court,
beard. Yeah, and
the Rebel City guy, he said, boy, your people are much smarter in California than if you ask people that in Ireland. I says, I don't think that. I bet you could do that in Ireland and get the same sort of response because it boils down to the editing process, you know. It's the bottom line is they started saying recently in the last 2 or 3 years that documentaries are written because they're written by the editor. They might not have a written script or screenplay, but in essence, that all this stuff exists and then someone whittles it down. So that's like my dinner with Andre feels like it's flowing conversation.
but
And you know,
they I mean, I think they had like this 9-hour conversation that they whittled down to that movie, and they seem very spontaneous, but I guess they were really saying lines. That's a great movie.
Yeah, but it is also this whole thing again with Finnegan's Wake. It feels like you're just having a conversation on the street with someone almost, you know, or you're listening in on people talking next to you walking down the street. And he captured that in the printed word form. But I do think that conversation is more close to our human experience than printed word. Yeah, Duncan.
Well, I think we have a historical problem. I think the problem these days is, and I'm going to be admittedly a curmudgeon here. You know, like you have lots of exposure to artists, and you read Joyce, and you know, you interview people, and Roy is involved in teaching literature, and he's very interested in poetry and all this stuff. And I am kind of the same way. But what the problem that I find with most people is they consume so much media that they're not really speaking. They're just regurgitating tapes that they've heard. And that's a modern problem. It did exist to a certain extent. I'm sure that back, 150 years ago, you had people who did nothing but, spout the local newspaper and the Bible. Okay. But these days, there's so much media consumption. And it's so easy just through repetition for that stuff to seep in. And it's almost like we open our mouths and this stuff starts coming out.
That's what I find depressing about political conversations, because it ends up, you spout talking points, and it seems like there's no. It's pointless in a way to talk to someone you don't agree with, because I feel like people these days are not going to be convinced by arguments or by a repetition of talking points. Everybody's kind of dug in their own point of view, or their own political stance. I guess including me, I must say.
But they feel safe. This is an important thing you brought up, Roy and Duncan, really, because I always said, I grew up following my hero, and I played, sports and been active. And then I realized that the people were like glued to sporting events, like it was their life. And it was consolidating people. And then, Devo sang a line, I never cared for sports, or Zappa said it too. I don't care for sports. I saw Zappa come out in Detroit once at a concert and goes, how are the Tigers doing? He knew they were doing well. He wasn't a sports guy. He was just saying this to like puff the people up or something, satirize them. But maybe he was just sort of saying, hey, we have a commonality. So then I thought for years, the reason there's a bar on every corner in America is so that you can get these people to drink beer and watch sports, and then you can pull the wool over their eyes politically, that they won't pay attention. And then I realized, that's probably not true, because they're in there watching the sports and then they end up talking about politics. And then, the root of it all is Dublin is where you go and you drink beer and you exchange your stories. And that's what life is. You just tell jokes, sing songs, and and drink beer. That's what I mean. So then my whole life flipped back to like, hey, don't be so hard on guys who like sports and beer. It's just the same thing as Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah. I have to say I like sports. I just don't like media sports.
Yeah.
I like the idea of going out and playing sports.
I mean, you actually want to play it instead of watching it? That's
because you follow Roy, do you follow baseball?
Well, it's weird. I have been a fanatic Yankee fan. For some reason this year, I didn't I wasn't interested. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I've gone through periods of really being into the football season, but it's the same thing. I don't know if I'm getting older or what.
Well, it's an interesting phenomenon, because like, what's the biggest yearly event in the world is the Super Bowl or the soccer thing that's going on right now.
The soccer thing is much bigger than football.
It's like, so I mean, again, it's like, isn't life supposed to be here now, live for the moment? That's what conversation is. So why would you ever want to nail it down in a book?
No, you don't nail it down in the book. That's if you think that's what I was saying. Oh, you're talking about in the writing of a book?
Yeah, no, I go ahead. I'm just thinking out loud, but yeah, no, I'm not saying you said it.
For me, like a lot of people, you may notice that I'm pretty much a fisherman. I take books and I will go off in all sorts of different directions because they have different impacts on me. And I'm just interested in, which one of these possible interpretations other people might find some use for or reality to. And I kind of like the game of, well, what did the author really mean? But I don't think that's near as important as the impact of getting together with people and saying, well, I'll go back to the Monday book club, it was absolutely fascinating to hear people's responses to, this young girl mothered. She finds out in one day that her father in a drunken fit has mortgaged the house and her mother is drowned in a lake. And she has to deal with all of this stuff. And it was very gratifying and fascinating to share people's reactions to this story, these events.
There's that book on Jonathan Swift wrote on the art of polite conversation. So there you have a book telling you how to have a conversation. But I think he had a very sophisticated sense of what a conversation was, which was a chance to display one's wit, and invention and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also doing that in the printed and the printed
Yeah.
art medium.
Right.
So it's interesting, Roy. You've chosen the profession of being a literature teacher, right? A literature educator. But where do you find, your satisfaction in talking with your students or seeing them eventually write something how do you balance that? Because this is like, okay, go read this and we're going to talk about it. So your job is more conversation than it is reading, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, but this is a common experience where I teach, where you can have these great class discussions, which are a lot of fun, and then students don't know how to get their ideas on paper. They're very awkward, or they get writer's block, there's a big drop off between going from speech to writing, in terms of quality of thought yeah.
So you mean it's a challenge because you're actually teaching them how to write an essay about something that they can do better talking about?
Well, I like to get them talking about something, and the idea is that they'll go from that to writing about it.
Yeah.
A lot of times there's falls of the shadow, as T.S. Eliot says, between something.
Wait, T.S. Eliot says what?
Between the intention and the act falls the shadow. I forget the exact quote.
Right.
Is that T.S. Eliot being Carl Jungian?
Well, I think, I don't think he means it in the way Carl Jung means the shadow.
Different shadow.
Yeah. But, they talk about people being afraid of their shadow. What could be more frightening than one's shadow?
Yeah. But it's also, again, Eliot is saying poetry is outing your inner dialogue. Why isn't he saying it's outing your inner printed word?
Your inner printed word. Do we have an inner printed word?
Well, that's what, when people, I ask that question, they either take it literal and they'll go English. What language is your inner dialogue in? They'll go English. And I'll go, no, I mean metaphorically, what form is your inner consciousness in? And then I'll go, TV commercials, or my mother complaining, or, there's some voice in their inner inside their head. And then how do you get that voice out? That's what he says is poetry. So it's funny because just the start of this conversation is conversation more natural, flowing humanness than printed word?
I would have to say yes, or it could be, but maybe things are all reversed, so that the printed word becomes nature and the spoken word becomes second nature.
That's what happened. Who came up with this? Who came up with second nature? Is that the McLuhan thing, or is that
that was what he was just talking about. And the last thing we read was about the second nature and technology as a second nature. But I was curious about how his training, McLuhan's training as a Jesuit, how that affected that idea of first and second nature, where it's almost like the fall of man, where there's an original innocent nature and then a fallen nature.
What caused the fallen nature in Jesuit?
The tree of eating that tree. Didn't you ever hear that story? Tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge is a bad thing.
Who says that?
Genesis. That's for like the first
Bible.
The Bible says that. So
the Bible says that knowledge
is true. Yeah. Yeah, the
Oh,
tree of the knowledge of good. Well, the two trees, you know, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And you,
Right. Right.
but I don't think you're even allowed. You're not allowed to have either of them. I don't think.
well, that's
Well,
is
once
that
again,
why?
I think. Mhm.
Go ahead, Duncan.
Well, I think once again in this sort of conversation, it's important to bring the history, to bring history in, and to bring particularly media history in. That my personal experience is that when I was younger, in fact, the younger I was, the more I was just repeating tapes. And the older I got, the more I stopped just sprouting out tapes and started, trying to actually engage conversation based upon what I personally was experiencing, plus my reading of people I consider intelligent, and what their description of their reality or their view of reality. And that there's now more space in my mind. It's not just constantly media tapes
Mm-hmm.
and recordings of one sort or another flowing through my head. There's a lot more space.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give another example. We've been reading Dante, and then recently, and it was fun and really good, and I was learning stuff from it. But when I stumbled across the digital Dante, and this professor at Columbia University, all of a sudden I realized for myself that at least I wanted some time where I'm not just trying to accomplish the aim of learning a little bit of Dante, but doing it with greater spaces and more reflection time.
Mm-hmm.
So the history is important,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and the age of the person is important, and the aim of the person is important. And what's really disturbing for me, but as my son says, well, you don't have to earn a living. Oh, we have to earn a living. And we don't have time, blah, 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 to read all those books and do all those things and avoid COVID and all that. Like, okay, fine. I understand that. It's true. You are in the thick of that. But this is my time to kind of, start considering everything in more depth and from more points of view and with more space in it, because bluntly speaking, end of life is more real to me.
As they say in Spinal Tap, too much bloody perspective. Too much.
So I'm glad you're here, Roy, because Roy usually goes, Wallace Stevens says this, and
No,
Dennis says this, and then
Spinal Tap's much more profound.
but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I
Roy.
mean, it reminds there's something Joyce said about Stephen Dedalus. He said, his mind is full of everybody else's thoughts, just like everybody. And he got this idea of refining the author out of existence. And I think you mentioned reading Bakhtin and the Dialogic, where instead of one voice, a personal voice or a univocal voice, you have these kind of competing voices. And I think it's weird. I mean, I think everything has a tendency to turn into cliche, so your deepest beliefs, if you repeat them long enough, they just become cliches. And,
Well, that's brilliant, Roy, because that's McLuhan's book, From Cliche to Archetype. And this is This is heavy what you just said. It refines the author out of existence, and then you have competing voices. Because I think what Duncan said was really important for what my head's going through right now is the space between and the depth. So when I saw Harold Bloom on Charlie Rose, I was like, this guy's the master because he knows how to put the cliche or the aphorism into context and take it farther. It's not just he's being the tape loop that Duncan is, which is what I am so much, is like, oh, I can just rattle off quotes or cute anecdotes, but so what? You know, unless you put them into a context to have a new epiphany or a new metaphor or a new question, so what? So people are just like, wow, that's cool. You know, all that is like one guy when I first started interviewing, he goes, "You're a name dropper." And I was like, yeah, duh. I guess I am. It's like, but
well, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, I hate a quotation. You know, so.
That's exactly the quote I'm using in my new article. Then I put all these quotes about death, and my friends who've read it, I should send it to you two. They says, dude, drop it from that point on. It's too long and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's the whole point, is that I'm making a joke on Emerson's quote. And all I want to do is list a bunch of quotes. So it's like, how did you get to that point, Duncan, where you can pull back and start to refine your thinking to see what, back to T.S. Eliot, is they had the experience but miss the meaning.
Yeah.
So,
well,
yeah.
Yeah, well, in my particular case, I mean, it's when I start actually seeing that I got a tape loop going,
Yeah.
and that the tape loop is not. I mean, it's having a tape loop going is not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
But when I personally started having an experience of just saying, I'm just talking shit, and then it's like, do I really want to talk shit? Or, should I just kind of drop it every once in a while? Obviously, I mean, you've both been in meetings with me, and sometimes, I just talk too much. And after a meeting, it's like, God damn, I feel like I was just sucking too much oxygen out of the space available. And then I'll say, well, I'm not going to do that next time. And then, of course,
I've known people who really do that, and I wouldn't say.
Go to the New York Wake meetings, man. That is a great display of that. But it really evokes back to the core of this beginning. Is it wouldn't matter what they're reading. It's the people who attend. It's their blossoming and then scratching the surface with each other.
They have been together. That core group has been together for like 20 years. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
And it is, that personality is such an amazing thing. And again, it's like, how did you develop it, Roy, to have, like Duncan said, the services of the tape loop? Being an educator too, you have certain syllabus and you have curriculum you have to set up. You pick it, and then it becomes this tape loop. How do you find freshness in revisiting it? Because it's
that's difficult. I mean, if you've been over something 100 times, the only enjoyment is if you can experience somebody else experiencing it for the first time, or somebody else getting excited by it. Feel like they're developing in some way. Yeah. But it's, I think I mentioned this in one of the McLuhan groups, this idea of the cento, which it was a medieval idea called patchwork, where in the medieval period, they didn't have the same idea of originality or personal property. So
Mhm.
a lot of works were quotes. They're composed of quotes, and they didn't even feel the
Mhm.
need to attribute where the quote came from. But it was almost like bad taste for you to speak in your own personal voice, as opposed to the venerable quotes. Uh,
You mean you're like regurgitating the what do they call that? Not the testament, but it's sort of like oral, it's sort of like church scripture.
mhm.
Or a hootenanny, is that what it's like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they had the same. Probably dogmatic did not
Oh,
have the negative connotation. Of course, you want to keep repeating the basic dogmas. That's how you create
Mhm.
corporate
Mhm.
entity or something.
Mhm. Mhm.
Rather, there wasn't that emphasis on individuality.
Right. Well, this is I think an important subject because it. One of the things that has happened on Twitter that I've noticed since Elon has taken over is there's a lot of people who've dropped out, and there's a really increasing percentage of aspiring writers,
Oh,
and they're not necessarily good writers. They're just people who want to write a book. And some of the questions are really intriguing to me. It's like, well, blah blah blah, and then how do you get an idea for a book and all this sort of thing? And I'm sitting there and said, and I want to say, don't write another book unless you really want to and you know what you want to say. Just don't do it.
mm, well,
Because I worked at Half Price Books for years, and the amount of popular books that we would throw into the trash was astounding.
hey.
that's a that's another biblical quote of bookmaking. There is no end.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we would we could fill up dumpsters full of, Harold Robbins books and Suzanne Jacqueline books and all this
Right.
kind of stuff, or whatever. Anyway, these popular books, and I mean, I don't get it. I mean, my fantasy is, if I really felt a strong need to write a book about a particular something, it was almost like a calling, I would probably do it.
Hmm.
But short of that, why wouldn't I just read more good books and do Zooms and talk about them with people?
Well, yeah, but when you have more time, you can now you can stop suffering and write your novel, or start suffering and write your novel.
Well, I have more time and I read more novels and take more naps.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember I saw, it's like I saw two or three movies in a row that they were all about aspiring writers going to New York to write their memoirs, and then they go through I think you mentioned one of them,
Right, I know. Yeah,
my um, Salinger years,
yeah,
where the
Oh,
end
the
of the
salad.
movie, it's like they're prepared to write their memoir, which is the story you just watched them preparing to
yeah.
write their memoir.
Yeah, it's because funny that Wall Street Urinal this week, second person singular, Kurt Vonnegut, The Making of a Writer. So
Mm,
this is a review by Megan Gurdon of a book by Dan Wakefield, who
Mhm.
was a good friend of Vonnegut's.
mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's really a fun review. I highly recommend it. But I'm going to quote, I'd love to hear you guys on this. In a letter in his late middle age to a literary antagonist, Vonnegut thanks the critic Anatole Broyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
For remarking. So this is Anatoly saying this on how slowly my literary reputation is dying. Part of the problem, surely, is that all my books remain in print and people continue to give me credit for having written them. Now, what in the heck does that mean? Because there's a twist there. Do either of you get it? I'll read it again if you
Yeah,
you know
okay.
why is Vonnegut so thanking Broyard for saying this remark?
Vonnegut is a satirist.
They're both he's appreciating his satire.
No, he's saying it's kind of like, well, I'm glad that he's pointing out to me that that my literary reputation is dying while I am selling immense numbers of books and have fans, everywhere.
But
That's what I get out of it.
But I mean, is there something that you almost become a caricature of yourself when you write a book and the book stays the same, and you develop or change or something, but the book is there written not in stone, but
Totally. That's a huge thing is Salinger, for instance, okay, he writes one great or a book that just is iconic, and then he wants to separate from it and not really, don't hold that against me or hold me to it the rest of my career.
Well, that's what Joyce said about Ulysses when he was writing Finnegan's Wake. He said, "Who wrote Ulysses?" I forget.
That's good. Yeah, he says that in the Wake.
He says that's an Elman. He talks about Joyce saying that when he was writing the Wake.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's I can imagine lots of people want to be a celebrity.
Yeah.
In America, and just as many people who've been celebrity wish that it never happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got Pynchon as an example. We've got Salinger as an example. And I heard a quote from Salinger the other day where he said, I just like to write.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I got to, I don't necessarily want to publish anything.
Mm-hmm.
I just like writing. Writing is good. It's good. It's fun. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can see, I think Jack Kerouac is, is kind of a glaring and bloody example of someone who, had talent, became a celebrity, and I don't know what happened to him.
Yeah.
Maybe the celebrity didn't have anything to do with it, but he, ended seemingly in a bad state.
Yeah. Did you ever see that interview with Buckley on Firing Line? I think where Kerouac says, I myself am Dionysus, but I am not Dionysus the arpeggiate. And then Buckley goes, no, that's the point.
What does that mean? Because I don't know what that means.
Dionysus the arpeggiate, he was a theologian, but that's different from the dying god Dionysus.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And you think of, I would think of Kerouac more like Dionysus, the intoxicated god.
He's an
intoxicated god.
Yeah. But it also, this quote, I think, brings up this, or I read into it, people continue to give me credit for having written them. So it is, how much is Vonnegut a vehicle for his environments, his culture, and they're coming through him? And how much is it him writing his book? Because why would Joyce go, oh, I didn't write Finnegan's Wake, the people over there at the, I mean, is that just romanticizing the creative process?
well, in a way, it's the opposite. Because I think the Romantics
Mhm.
had this lyrical sense of the personal voice that
Mm.
yeah, that they didn't, they didn't want to speak for everybody else. They just wanted to, to create that yeah, lyrical sensibility.
Right. But, how much is it? This person has a talent to put these words together. So, back to Duncan saying, I'm just a loop and repeating this. I mean, isn't that how we're raised in our education system? I went to Latin class in a Catholic high school. I got straight A's. Every day we had a quiz. I knew how to memorize exactly what was going to be on the quiz and nail it. I can't remember any of that. Did it subconsciously get in my head and teach me how to memorize quotes like I can, do now? Or did it do anything to me in the long run that other than just learn memorizing techniques?
Hmm.
So it's hard to tell what affects your creative process.
Yeah, it is, and it will always be hard to tell who's the actual author,
Hmm.
and that's okay. But I want to correct one thing when I'm talking about tape loops.
Yeah.
I'm specifically talking about a culture's cliches and advertising and kind of Disney level creations.
But that's
You know,
Duncan, that's what Joyce did with Finnegan's Wake. He just said, let me rattle off a bunch of ads here and sell you women's, uh, hand cream. And that's the same thing what Zappa did. He would just be a collage and feed back to you all the swirl of information overload.
but Finnegan's Wake is a little bit more problematic since most people don't know how to interpret it. So I think Ulysses is a better example, frankly, clearer example of the particularly the Cyclops,
Hmm.
and then Nausicaa following that, and Aeolus, where he is. If you analyze Cyclops, and then what do we call the scene with the medical students and the people drinking
Oxen of the Sun.
oxen of the sun? I
Hmm.
mean, if you read those things, Joyce is mercilessly mocking writing of all kinds
Right.
that have fallen into cheap cliche.
But I think Cyclops is a really good example of, you have that collision between, the narrator. There's a real narrative voice in Cyclops that I think it actually was based on Joyce's father.
Mhm.
It keeps getting interrupted by these written cliche, vignettes, from the newspapers or from, uh, and there's a
Yeah.
constant clash between the oral and the written in Cyclops.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I see, I love those sections,
Hmm.
and I love to read them in the cliche ridden form that, at least in my opinion, they should be. And lo, he
Hmm.
he came over the horizon with his
Yeah.
trusty sword in his hand, and all this stuff. I mean, it's just over the top, but everyday stuff. I mean, you can go to any bookstore in America and you can find that kind of stuff. Romance novels, Nausicaa, the romance novel stuff, and the ladies' magazines. And then you can go to the men's magazines, and it's just hilarious.
Mhm. And what's that? Eamus? No, the third chapter from the end, where the narrator's
Eumaeus.
Eumaeus, where he's just completely given into cliche speech, and he's too tired. They're too tired to actually.
Oh, right. Where Bloom is
Elaborate.
kind of, lecturing and just
Well,
talking shit.
he brings in every kind of cliche you could think of, and it's very funny chapter. But I've heard someone say I don't like it because it's badly written. But that's the whole. It's not badly written. It's a parody of bad writing.
Yeah. And I always have fun with that one because I keep on thinking, God, Stephen is tired. He's hungover.
Mm-hmm.
It's
been a long day.
It's been a long day.
Yeah, the
And
whorehouses.
here's this old man rattling all this bullshit on me.
Yeah.
But I think that's an example when people are tired and unimaginative.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're smart, they're these tape loops will bleed in because I don't feel we have to fill space, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, it's hilarious. And I think that's an important part of, what Joyce is doing. He's bringing this out and putting it in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Many a time and oft. Kind of makes you cringe.
He's a content provider. I got it.
But there wasn't.
I've got to provide content here. But what you do, Roy, too, is you do that. You'll drop a Spinal Tap quote, and that enables you to tap into, let's just call it lowbrow culture, and then there's highbrow literature. And so is that what the change was?
Well, since that's what Joyce is all about, and the music halls, vaudeville, those things are in the wake, and here's a whole chapter on the journalist, which some people look down on, but I was surprised that Mallarmé really had a very high opinion of newspapers, as almost like a poetic. The new poetry is the newspaper. Right.
I didn't know that because that's
McLuhan has a great essay on
that. Oh, well, that's what I was just going to say. McLuhan has that great line I use all the time. He said, the front, you can't write the great American novel because the front page of the newspaper is the great American novel, and that's what happened. Twitter became the great American novel, or whatever, whatever hot new platform is the great American novel. What dictates who we are today? Mm-hmm. I would say it's actually the Zoom sessions. Mm-hmm. That's why we're called Zoomers, but we're really boomers who have become Zoomers, because you realize, I mean, what's happening with us right now is an amazing phenomenon. You're in New York, you're in Texas, I'm in California, and we're having the ideal for me, and I thank you for enlightening me so much with your time in spoken word that came out of all your printed word research. Is the New York Times every Sunday has that book review section. In the second, third page is an interview with some hot author, and the last question usually is, what 3 people would you like to have a dinner party with? you know, meaning, you know, as that Mark Twain, and they always say James Joyce, Mark Twain, and Willa Cather, or, you know, whoever they say. In a couple issues back, this woman goes, "Are you kidding? I would no way be in a dinner party. I would be under the table watching their feet and listening because their feet action's going to tell me more than being up front, you know, in what we designed as, I mean, who designed the Zoom framing, you know, that you're going to just show the head and the shoulder, you know.
How is our tool shaping us right now? As
That's what I mean. Well, it's an amazing phenomenon that we're talking about conversation, but it is the tool. So I'm just still going back to that tape loop thing that I love, because it reminds me, Duncan, of matching and making. Another McLuhan thing is like, you know, I grew up matching. I grew up going to my dad and saying, "Dad, I have this assignment. Can you help me?" And then he would sort of like dictate the words and I'd write it down. I got straight A's. So that's it. My whole life has just been, oh, I'll take this and flip it over to this, you know.
Yeah, well, you learn to listen to other people.
I guess
compliment, I should say. But I gotta go back to Marleme and put out the perhaps provocative statement that I think that probably the newspaper people wrote the lines that Marleme admired when they were under severe deadline and they just had to write without even thinking about it.
But is that a good thing or a bad thing? You're saying that's a bad thing?
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying it's when their conscious mind was not even really able to write. They were just taking stuff and they were just, you know, they had to submit 5 articles because the newspapers can be printed in an hour, and they would just, you know, do all this stuff. But then to go back to Joyce, particularly in the Aeolus chapter where he's with the newspaper people, and they're trying to tempt him to come to work for the newspaper, and he's basically saying, you know, it ain't happening.
Well, that's so funny. I mean,
I'm not hanging out with you. You know, you guys are okay every once in a while, and I'll go have some drinks with you, but you know, I ain't writing for you guys.
Well, but the whole that form, the form of the newspaper with the headline, you know, we take it for granted, the headline and then the story. But it's kind of funny in the Aeolus where you have these ordinary events and they're announced with these headlines, you know.
Right. Well, I think that is actually repeated in the Cyclops chapter, because the Cyclops thing is, you know, it's just some opinionated drunks going on, and then Joyce is taking, instead of headlines, he's taking whole chapters and verses out of chivalry books and statements in the church and beauty contest and, you know, scholarship awards and all this stuff. And he's
reports of hangings.
Say that again?
Newspaper reports of executions, you know.
Yeah, which are also in that same bombastic, over the top style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, this is really heavy, because what I hear you saying, Duncan and Roy, is the newspaper writer is under pressure because of a deadline. So they almost have to flip into the unconscious state of just getting this stuff out and not be so conscious, I have to research and do this article good. They almost flip into another mode where they're putting the spontaneous conversation right into printed word. And so if you go to George Lakoff, he says, we, as a neuroscientist, he says, and a linguist, both, he says, we operate 80% unconsciously. So then that goes back to my premise. Isn't conversation better than printed word? And I'm not saying better, I'm just saying it's different, but it's like, well, what isn't having the deadline, you're going to get better writing in the newspapers, and we're going to consume the newspapers right there, because back to this Wall Street Urinal on Kurt Vonnegut. Look at what they take the article and summarize it all in one little line, describing a writer's experience from family happiness and tribulation to false starts and literary triumph, as if speaking to the reader. So there he changed.
I think you should read that in a very dramatic voice.
You want to read it, Duncan? Do it better.
Let's see. Describing a writer's experience from family happiness and tribulation to false starts and literary triumph, as if speaking to the reader.
You may have a job waiting for you.
You could work for the Wall Street Urinal reading the newspaper papers on tape. But here's the thing. Speaking is conversation. He's not saying as if you're guiding the reader on the reading experience. They shifted the sense ratio shifting, as if metaphorically you're speaking to the reader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it seems like the things get too literary, then they start to seem too artificial. Then you have these movements in literature where the speaking voice comes through, usually through a dialect or through broken English, or through an insane narrator who doesn't have command of these high-flown literary styles.
Well, it's always a challenge to write with a fresh effect.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is why there are, like in music, like in dance, like in fashion, there's ebb and flow and change all the time, because our minds get used to and bored with patterns that we recognize all the time. I mean, we like someone like Joyce because it's challenging, and as PJ likes to say, you can read them 100 times. It's going to be something different every time. Okay, but I want to come back to the newspaper thing, because I want to insist that I would be willing to bet that if I picked up a copy of a newspaper that was produced under pressure, as is most newspapers, they are done under pressure, and I went through the newspaper, I would find 3 or 4 lines of Marla quality.
Yeah.
Still, 97% of the newspaper is going to be kind of so-so writing at best.
Well, what is it, the whole idea of the cut-ups that William Burroughs used to do? He would cut up a newspaper and then put them together. The rearrangement, you have the same material, but it would rearrange into strange shapes. But in the Wake, though, I mean, the Wake is highbrow and lowbrow, and people think there must be very profound meanings, line to line. But a lot of times, when they find the source, it is a newspaper. It's, he takes some phrase from a newspaper from 1922 and just transcribes it into the Wake.
That's like Zappa has a song, and the guy goes, "A-D-do," and these people would call up from Europe and goes, "What is that?" And I goes, "That's a plumber who had a TV commercial in LA where he goes, AD do, you know, it's like just a stupid ad that's musical because the way we talk, he insists that the way we talk is musical, is, you know, very musical, the way we talk. So, I mean, there's a lot of crossover in that. Joyce and Zapp are both just like taking the commonality of this, what we're living in, and regurgitating it back to you.
Yeah. Well, I had a fun thing the other day. I discovered a new Twitter account. It's like, or Facebook account. It's like, historical videos and photographs in old Ireland. Okay. So I didn't, until I saw a few of these moving images of carts rolling over cobblestones. I didn't realize what a fucking racket it was. That the everyday life of carts going back and forth over cobblestones all the time, it's incredibly noisy. Okay. And then there's, I forget who it was, maybe Roy can help, or maybe you know, Jerry, there's a Gordon or somebody who's talking about how, like a lot of the sounds in Finnegan's Wake are actually traffic noises on the streets of Paris.
Oh, wow.
Well, he does. I mean, there is a poem. I think it's Horace or it's some, about Rome and the noise of Rome, and the but there is that, the vehicles going by, hippo hobbies, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a racket. It's like, oh my God, it's as bad as cars leaving the football stadium after a big game and honking of horns and people shouting at each other and all that.
He was a connoisseur of noise, yeah.
Connoisseur of noise, yeah. Among other things, noise, smells, taste.
Yeah. Equal opportunity.
Signal to noise ratio, I guess. But it's like, just think of when COVID hit, it caused this phenomenon of Zoom. I mean, I'm still in awe of this, the fact that if COVID wouldn't have hit, we probably wouldn't have become friends. I mean, I would hope, but this is a weird thing that happened. Yeah. And I ride my bike in the morning at 6 a.m. and it's so peaceful. That's part of the great thing, is that I can, if there's no clicking on my bike, I can hear silence as I'm moving. And it's just, and you get these amazing sunrises and it's just quiet. Whereas if I ride my bike from here to the library, it's all traffic noise and it's a lot of commotion and billboards and people. And, it's a nice little ride, but it's still noisy and I'm just used to it. And COVID hits and you go outside and ride your bike and it's like you're in the woods and there's more animals running around and there's no cars. And I was like, what happened? This disaster has made us flip into this amazing thing. And now it's like 3 years going. And now my friend has Omicron. I'm like, oh no, is this still going on? It's like, we're changed forever, but how different.
We're going to have heavy duty sense ratio shifting.
Heavy duty sense, because it's like, how different is this from polio, when we all had polio vaccines and we had, this science and art phenomenon crossing over, like,
So we're going towards noise and away from signal?
I don't know, Roy. It was just one of those cliche terms I heard some intellectuals say the other day, and I goes, I want to start using that signal to noise ratio.
Somebody wrote that anybody who likes Finnegan's Wake has a high tolerance for signal to noise ratio.
Is that what they say?
That's it. Yeah. What?
Because it seems to be so noisy. So I mean, I cannot figure out why. Like, we're reading the Wake in a couple hours in the Venice Wake, and I like it, but I still just completely understand the Wake in the Sweeney reading, because we read 5 pages and it's just, you can really get into it deeper, how you read it,
You
how
get the sound.
how the sound of the book should be read, in my opinion, how the book should be experienced, because it's just, you're not set on one page, you're just flowing, and I can't figure out what it does to me physically and mentally in my being, because I feel like it's like a safe place, or it's like what's called comfort food.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like comfort food when I'm reading The Wake at Sweeney's for some reason.
Yeah, and you're not too worried about meaning. You're more, I would assume you're more focused on sound itself.
I don't know, Duncan. I think it is meaning. I'm looking at everything going, what could this mean? What do these experts think it means? And why is it flowing so naturally, as opposed to the way words are usually put together and they specifically mean something? It's
Okay.
not.
Okay. I'm a little different view. I mean, some things will jump out at me, but it's kind of like going to the beach
Yeah.
and wading into the water where there's shells and fish and whatnot. And I see an occasional pretty shell. I see a fish. I see somebody's toes, you know.
Yeah.
But I'm more there just listening to the waves of the beach and feeling the coolness of the water on my feet and my calves, and enjoying the breeze. And that's kind of what the Sweeney's Lake as a experience is for me. Um, but of course, you've been reading for many, many more years than I have. But I have a feeling that as I go through, like today, the Mooksy and the Grips was great, because there's a lot of deliberate sound stuff in there.
Yeah.
It's very smooth and fun,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like I got a little bit more meaning out of it than usual, but I wasn't so concerned about the meaning part.
Yeah.
But I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I think it's kind of like the Catholic Mass in Latin, where when you're a kid, a newbie, it's just all it's incense and blah, 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 blah. And then as you get more experience with the flow of the mass, it gets greater and greater meaning if you're a religious person, or if you're Joyce, you go off and you steal their thunder for other purposes.
But he continued to attend mass, I think. Joyce did, because he liked the whole show. Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
I wanted to ask you, Roy, exactly what Duncan's talking about, and I have to give an example first. I'm an altar boy and Catholic growing up. I was going to be a priest, and really? I know one Latin line. All those couple years I got straight A's in Latin. I know one Latin line. Dominus vobiscum ecum spiritu tuo. Now, do you know why I remember that line? Because in the middle of a Frank Zappa song, he goes, Dominus vobiscum ecum spiritu tuo. You can eat my sleazy pancakes just for saintly Alfonso. I mean, it is so amazing that I learned something, tape loop, got it in my head, then hear it in,
another context,
in a different context, in a reversal, and then it sticks with me. But
I mean, Bloom, he goes to a mass and he has, as a Jew, and he's thinking that the Latin stupefies people like a drug. The repetition, and he compares it to advertising, the way advertising stupefies people by just repeating the thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
that is really good. Stupefies. That the church and ads are the same. Yeah. But
pray for us, pray for us, pray for us, buy from us, buy from us, buy from us.
let us pry. But Roy, I'm curious your feelings on knowing how to absorb printed word very well, and not only absorb it, tape loop it, but also understand it in context with other printed word. And I'm grateful for you being able to do that. But then you come along with the Wake, and it's the opposite of that in so many ways. So why would you be attracted to the Wake? Because it's doing something that's pushing your profession so far, or you get some sort of enlightenment from it, or it's just I'm just curious.
Well, I guess it's saying, well, why would someone become a McLuhan scholar? Because McLuhan also he's questioning the whole basis of the printed word.
Right. You mean why? If somebody questions what you're specializing in.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I still remember. I grew up. I hated reading. I liked comic books when I was young, but I hated something creeped me out about being a bookworm, which I turned into. But I just remember. Yeah, I think it was Notes from Underground. I read that book, and it says consciousness is a disease. And when I read, I don't know when I've never quite recovered from that, and I've always, in a way, but I don't. I was always looking for this kind of revelation, and my search for revelations has gotten less and less.
You mean that was your tipping point to go literature? Notes of the Underground.
I developed kind of an obsession. I actually got rid of my comic books. If I hadn't done that, I'd be rich.
Oh, there you go. Foiled again.
But see, that's an amazing phenomenon, because you ever get that book called Understanding Comics? It's sort of a McLuhan-esque. It's very good. It's very good. Yeah.
It's one of my bathroom reading books.
Yeah, and it's a phenomenon on how many people I interview, and that's how they got in. That's where they started, was comic books.
Huh.
And it is a specialized visual medium plus printed word. So it was like sneaking you into understanding printed word.
Yeah, my mother would buy these classic comics and try to sneak in some good reading.
I
thought it was there's some kind of surreptitious thing she was doing, like slipping in vegetables or something.
Oh, right. Yeah. Jerry, do you remember? I think I sent you a thing about the Tower of Babel last week or the week before.
Tell me about it. I looked at it for a second, but tell me what the point was.
The point was that it only became Babel. It actually became Babel because the people lost respect for other people speaking a different language. And that actually it's the key, a key to understanding and respect is to learn other languages. But of course, you can't learn another language unless you really think that the people speaking that language have a good soul and have intelligence within that language. But so this is kind of a different interpretation of the Tower of Babel. That it's kind of like maybe the Tower of Babel was not so much building the tower up and then God confusing people with different tongues, but maybe people had all along spoken a number of different tongues, and then for whatever reason they became suspicious of others who spoke languages other than their native language.
Well, it's kind of
I
like
ramble on like that.
almost like an Eden myth of there was one original language, but that's something. I mean, the Wake actually refers to something called Gortigern, I think.
Cordigan?
Gortigern, Gortigern, which was supposedly the original language before Babel occurred.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And Joyce even said that this is the Wake is before the language. I meant to create something before the languages were separated in Babel, by the Babylonian disaster, whatever you call it, the separation of tongues.
So my friend made up a joke. Where do you go when you talk too much? Babylon. Where do they send you if you talk too much? Babylon. But yeah, we're closing out here in about 10 minutes, so I really appreciate this again. But I wanted to go into this line in play off of this language thing, Tower of Babel, you just brought up, Duncan. Thank you. Is the line that we read in the Wake today, which is a phenomenal line. And let me be Los Angeles. Now, I mean, for reading the Wake in LA for over 25 years, it's like I was always intrigued why any of these big highbrow newspapers or magazines, and we've had a few articles in them, but this is like the best headline you could have. Reading Club in LA and Let Me Be Los Angeles, written in 1939, you know, when Wizard of Oz and in the movie capital of the world, Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind are 39. So you got the two big movie events. You got Finnegan's Wake saying, and Let Me Be Los Angeles. And then they were talking about, Orla brought it up so well. She says, well, let me be, it could be like they're on the telephone. Let me be Los Angeles. Let me get, you know, what do you, go ahead, Roy.
I know that line, you know, let you be beaten and let me be Los Angeles. And it does say that Beaton was a town in Los Angeles that was a town near Los Angeles that was swallowed up by Los Angeles. But it seems like there's a negative connotation in there that the Mooks is the angel, you know, Los Angeles, who is, you know, dominating the heretical gripes, you know, who's of the devil's party, he's trying to stamp out the heresies by claiming that he is descended from the angels.
From the angels. In the Mooks are Joyce, and the gripes are Will Lewis.
No. The Mooks is Sean, and the gripes is Shem.
Right, but isn't it also a Lewis in Wyndham Lewis?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that's more in the other fable, the Grace Hopper and the Aunt.
Oh, that's the Grace Hopper. Yeah, you're right. But it's funny because I never knew that Beaton thing. I'm going to look that up.
I looked that up. I could never find a reference to it outside of McHugh.
Oh, McHugh says that?
But I'd be interested what the history of Los Angeles is in that.
Yeah. Because I thought this was an amazing, just to go full circle with the beginning on Conversation Salon, a place where one lives or dwells. Conversation etymologically means living together. So a place where one lives or dwells is the first line that conversation means in etymology online. It's like, what? A conversation is a place where one lives or dwells? Okay. So there's a movie I recommend you watch, 2010. It's online free, called Problema. And they have in the space where they burned books. They set up like 25 chairs and they asked 25 modern thinkers like Cornell West and all these people to answer
Mhm.
these 10, 20 questions, sort of politically oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I love to repeat, but it's interpreted different ways, is should we have the right to choose where we live? And most people go, well, yeah, like I was raised in Flint, Michigan, and I says, I'm out of here, and went to Ann Arbor for 8 years, and now I've been in Venice for 42 years. I chose where I wanted to live, and I feel like I live in heaven, so I have no complaints. But when I go back once in a while, I feel I've abandoned my hometown in that it's not good. And then my friend has this line that goes, bloom where you're planted. So everyone should be raised and stay where they were raised, and I'm not saying it as a rule, but it's any comments on this, because I think it's a big issue in Joyce, but it again goes to this, the root of our discussion. If conversation is place where you live or dwell. So go ahead, Roy. Sorry.
No, I mean, I was born and raised in Westchester, and I guess, I mean, I liked growing up in suburbia, but then in my adolescence, I really developed a just a hatred for suburbia for some reason. I tried to move into, like, the worst place in New York City I could find, like between Avenue A and B, on horrified my parents, but I wanted to get the suburbs out of my system in some way, like
Yeah.
slumming or something. But now, yeah, but now I'm living like in an NYU dorm, so I can't.
Yeah.
NYU is taking over everything.
but it is a phenomenal thing that Joyce went through this love of where he was from, but had to get away from it to make him think, Duncan, go ahead, you comment, because you know this issue well.
Well, I'm the product of generations of picking up and moving. And the place where I was raised, I mean, it would have, I was glad to leave it. I've gone back to visit a couple of times. I was glad to go back and visit, but it's not like I'm thoroughly impressed with most people who stayed where they were raised.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm more of the when I was 15 years old, I read a not very good novel called The Run for Home, which for somehow reason had a big effect on me. And it was basically about a young boy who went and became a merchant seaman for a time, and had all these experiences, and then he ended up going back home. But there's no, and that did have an effect on me. But the closest I can be, I am in Austin, Texas, where I came when I was 17 years old and stayed for almost 10 years the first time, and then went away for 30 years or so, and then came back. And I'm fine. I don't feel any need now to even travel. I mean, it was nice seeing you and Susie, Jerry, and I like meeting Steve and Penny and all that. But, all the people around me, I mean, they're zooming off to here and they're zooming off to there. And I guess I'm just an old curmudgeon these days. And I've kind of had my fill for the most part.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, I'm fine. I like sitting here and looking at the oak tree out the window and all that. So have I returned to kind of the place where I was born in a sense, and now I'm blooming there, the final
You're blooming where you were planted. Exactly. Where we were planted. We were planted on live TV screens, and now we're blooming.
Well, this is interesting. This is the interesting part, because actually it's the virtual world and the virtual friends that I've developed during COVID that allows me to reside comfortably here. I've never spent so much time in my home than the last 3 years.
Yeah.
But if you go looking for your heart's desire, you don't need to look any further than your own backyard, because if it's not there, you never lost it to begin with.
What's that from, Roy?
That's Dorothy.
That's Dorothy.
Wizard of
I
Oz.
love that.
Oh, Wizard of Oz. All right.
You know what that is? That's the Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, I'll close out. This was really fun, guys, and I hope you join us in an hour for Finnegan's Wake. But you got it. Me and Duncan got
to be coherent.
Yeah, me and Duncan got to take a nap. But home is where the art is, A-R-T. And then you could say home is where the fart is, if you're talking Finnegan's Wake, poo-poo caca. But home is where the heart is. And I really felt this was a heartfelt conversation with you, both of you. So I thank you so much. And unless you guys have any closing words, I'll just hit the end.
I have a closing word. I want to bring it back. The first part of this discussion tonight had to do with conversation. And I want to repeat the thing that, I had for many decades. I had a dear, incredibly intelligent friend who I spent probably 1,000 hours or more in conversation with him. And he died tragically. And I had kind of a void in my life until COVID happened, and I got involved with Sweeney's, and we had an online Austin thing weekly. I think we even had it twice a week in the beginning for a while, and then met Jerry, and then went over to Sweeney's. And I feel like my friend has come back, and all these little boxes on Zoom are like cells of his soul.
Here comes everybody.
Here comes everybody. What's his name, Duncan?
His name was Jack Rife. He was a classic scholar who had studied. He knew Greek, and he had studied Hebrew, and he was a Marxist and a very talented fellow. So thank you all for being part of me and for representing Jack. Thanks again. I hope I'm coherent, somewhat coherent.
No, that was beautiful, Duncan. It was a tribute to all of you. Both. Thank you so much, Duncan. Thank you, Roy.
Adios.
All right.
On we go.